Right now, you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you, something heavy that's been weighing you down for so long, you've forgotten what freedom feels like. Maybe it's harsh words that still echo in your mind. Maybe it's the pain of abandonment or betrayal. Maybe it's that relentless voice saying you're not enough. Here's what will shock you: 90% of your pain isn't even real. It's a ghost your mind created to protect you, but now it's destroying you. I know you're thinking, you don't understand what I've been through. You're right, I don't know your story, but I know this. Somewhere right now, someone who experienced your exact pain is completely at peace. Same trauma, same loss, but one person found freedom while the other stays trapped. How is this possible? The answer comes from a 2,500-year-old discovery that transformed millions of lives. People with no therapists, no medications, just the courage to understand how suffering really works. I'm your host at Echoes of Dharma. What I'm about to share isn't theory, it's a practical path that's worked for emperors and beggars alike. But first, let me tell you about a young monk who lost everything and discovered the secret that changes everything. In the mountains of Tang Dynasty, China, there lived a young monk named Linji. He had fled to the monastery at 16, running from a childhood of abandonment and neglect. His father had walked away when he was 7, leaving behind only the echo of slammed doors and his mother's quiet sobs. His mother, broken by heartbreak, had grown distant and cold, dying when Linji was barely 14. When Linji entered the monastery, he carried wounds so deep they felt like physical scars across his soul. He threw himself into spiritual practice with the desperate intensity of a drowning man grasping for rope. He meditated until his legs went completely numb, memorized thousands of sacred verses, and followed every monastic rule with perfect precision. But Linji wasn't seeking enlightenment, he was seeking salvation. He was looking for someone, anyone, to tell him he was worthy of love. He needed his teacher's approval, his fellow monks' respect, even Buddha's divine blessing to prove that despite being abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love him, he was actually valuable. For 8 long years, this pattern consumed him. The harder he tried to be the perfect monk, the more frustrated he became. Other students seemed to find peace effortlessly, while his mind remained a churning storm of self-doubt and rage. During meditation, instead of discovering calm, he would be flooded with memories: his father's retreating figure, his mother's empty stare, the crushing loneliness of being unwanted. Think about your own life for a moment. What are you trying desperately hard at right now? What are you hoping will finally prove your worth? Maybe it's excelling in your career, maintaining the perfect relationship, looking flawless on social media, or even being the most spiritual person in your circle. Can you feel that same desperate intensity that consumed Linji? That exhausting need to prove you deserve love. One autumn morning, unable to bear the weight any longer, Linji stormed into his master Huineng's chambers. His eyes blazed with 8 years of accumulated frustration as he poured out his heart. "Master, I've done everything perfectly. I've meditated more than any other student. I've memorized more sutras, followed more rules, shown more devotion. Yet I'm still suffering. The peace you promised isn't here. The enlightenment I've been working toward feels further away than ever. What's wrong with me? Why haven't you given me the teaching that will finally make me whole?" Master Huineng sat in perfect stillness, his weathered face showing infinite compassion. After a long silence that felt like eternity, he spoke words that would shatter Linji's entire worldview. "My dear student, there is nothing I can give you that will make you whole, because there is nothing missing from you. Your suffering doesn't come from lacking something, it comes from believing that someone else holds the key to your peace. Stop right here. Let these words settle into your awareness. There is nothing missing from you. How does that feel to hear? Does part of you immediately resist, thinking, but I do need certain things to be happy? Do you find yourself arguing, if nothing is missing, why do I feel so empty? Linji certainly couldn't accept it. These words triggered a rage so profound it surprised even him. He leaped to his feet, his voice cracking with years of suppressed pain. Then why am I here? Why do we have teachers if you can't help me? Why do we have all these practices if they don't lead anywhere? What's the point of any of this spiritual seeking if it's all meaningless? In his fury, Linji did something unthinkable in monastery culture. He actually struck his master. His hand connected with Huineng's shoulder, a physical expression of 8 years of spiritual frustration and childhood abandonment. But instead of anger or punishment, Master Huineng's face broke into the most radiant smile Linji had ever seen. He chuckled softly and said, "Now you're beginning to understand. You've been looking for someone to save you, to complete you, to give you what you think you lack. But what happens when you stop waiting for rescue? What happens when you stop giving your power away?" In that explosive moment, Linji experienced his first glimpse of what the Buddha had taught centuries before, the profound teaching of the 2 arrows. And this teaching will revolutionize how you understand your own suffering. The Buddha explained it like this: when painful events strike our lives, we experience what he called the first arrow. This is unavoidable pain, the loss of a loved one, betrayal by someone we trusted, failure of our dreams, physical illness, or in Linji's case, childhood abandonment. Life shoots these first arrows at everyone. Rich or poor, spiritual or secular, no one escapes them. But here's where most people create their own hell. We immediately shoot ourselves with a second arrow. This second arrow isn't the painful event itself. It's our story about what that event means. It's our resistance to what happened, our judgment about it, our desperate attempts to make it unhappen. For Linji, the first arrow was his father leaving and his mother's emotional abandonment. Real pain that shaped his young heart. But the second arrow was the story he told himself: I am fundamentally unlovable. Something must be wrong with me for my own parents to reject me. I need to prove my worth through perfect spiritual practice. I need someone else to validate that I'm worthy of love. Now, be brutally honest with yourself. What's your second arrow? What story do you tell yourself about your pain that keeps you trapped long after the original wound should have healed? Maybe your first arrow was a devastating breakup, but your second arrow is the story: I'll never find love again because I'm too damaged. Maybe your first arrow was losing a job, but your second arrow whispers, I'm a failure who will never succeed at anything. Maybe your first arrow was childhood criticism, but your second arrow insists, I have to be perfect to be worthy of respect. The Buddha's insight was revolutionary. While we cannot control the first arrows that life shoots at us, we torture ourselves with the second arrows of our own making. This isn't just ancient philosophy. This is the practical difference between pain that passes and suffering that can last decades. Pain is clean. It hurts intensely, but flows through you like a storm, fierce but temporary. Suffering is pain plus resistance, pain plus story, pain plus the demand that reality be different than it is. When you add your mental commentary to life's inevitable difficulties, you transform temporary pain into chronic suffering. In that moment of striking his master, something shifted in Linji's consciousness. He realized he had been waiting his entire life for someone else to heal his childhood wounds, to prove his worth, to give him permission to be at peace. But what if no one was coming? What if the very act of waiting for external rescue was what kept him trapped? This was Linji's first taste of what Zen calls self-reliance, not the arrogant independence of the ego, but the profound recognition that your essential nature, your Buddha nature, your capacity for peace and wisdom cannot be given to you by anyone else because it was never missing in the first place. Master Huineng continued, every moment you spend looking outside yourself for validation, for healing, for completion, you abandon the wholeness that is already here. The monastery didn't make you worthy, you brought your worthiness with you. I cannot give you peace, I can only point to the peace you already are. Think about this deeply. How much energy do you spend seeking approval, validation, or love from others? How often do you check your reflection in other people's opinions of you? When someone criticizes you, do you immediately doubt yourself? When someone praises you, do you feel temporarily worthy? This is the exhausting cycle of external dependency that keeps you trapped. But recognizing the two arrows was only the beginning of Linji's transformation. What he discovered next about attachment and the nature of clinging would reveal why even good things in our lives can become sources of suffering, and why the very things we think will make us happy often become our prisons. Years later, after Linji had become a revered master with his own temple, a wealthy tea merchant arrived at his monastery gates. This merchant, known throughout the province as Chen, was famous for creating the most exquisite tea ceremonies in all of China. He possessed tea sets that had been crafted by legendary artisans, leaves so rare they were worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, and a reputation that opened doors to the palaces of emperors. Chen approached the monastery dressed in silk robes that whispered of prosperity with every step. His servants carried precious tea implements wrapped in the finest cloths bowls that had been passed down through generations, whisks carved from bamboo that grew only in sacred groves, water vessels that had been blessed by monks centuries ago. When Chen finally sat before Master Linji, his hands trembled slightly as he carefully arranged his treasures. Despite all his wealth and acclaim, his eyes held a haunted quality that Linji recognized immediately. Master, Chen began, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety, I have achieved everything a man could dream of. I own the most valuable tea collection in the empire. Nobles travel for months just to experience my ceremonies. My name is spoken with reverence in the finest circles. Yet every morning, I wake with a gnawing terror in my chest. What if I lose it all? What if someone surpasses my skill? What if my reputation crumbles? I cannot enjoy a single moment of what I've built because I'm constantly afraid it will disappear. Before we continue with Chen's story, pause and ask yourself, what in your life are you afraid of losing? Maybe it's your job, your relationship, your youth, your children's dependence on you, or even your identity as someone who has it all together. Can you feel that same gnawing anxiety Chen described? That fear that steals your joy even when everything seems to be going well. Chen continued pouring out his heart. I check on my tea collection multiple times each day, making sure nothing has been damaged. I lose sleep worrying about competitors who might develop better techniques. I can barely concentrate during my own ceremonies because part of my mind is always calculating threats to my position. Master, I came here because I've heard you can teach people to find peace. But how can I be at peace when everything I've worked for could vanish at any moment? Linji observed Chen with deep compassion, noting how the merchant's eyes constantly darted to his precious tea implements, how his breathing remained shallow and quick, how even in this moment of seeking help, he couldn't fully relax because he was mentally guarding his treasures. My friend, Linji said gently, would you honor me by preparing tea? I would love to experience the artistry that has made you so renowned. Chen's face lit up with pride, but also intensified focus. As he began the ceremony, Linji watched with fascination. Chen's hands moved with extraordinary skill, each gesture perfected through decades of practice, but there was no joy in it. His movements were rigid with anxiety, his face tense with the pressure of performing flawlessly. Every few seconds, his eyes would check to ensure nothing was broken, nothing spilled, nothing imperfect. When you think about the things you love most in your life, are you fully present with them? Or is part of your mind always watching, worrying, protecting? Notice how exhausting this constant vigilance becomes. You end up being a guard for your own happiness rather than someone who can actually enjoy it. After the tea ceremony, Linji asked Chen to walk with him to a cliff that overlooked a vast valley. The view was breathtaking, mountains rolling into the distance like frozen waves, clouds casting moving shadows across the landscape, a river winding through it all like a silver thread. At the cliff's edge, Linji picked up a smooth stone about the size of a child's fist. He held it out to Chen and said, "Take this stone and hold it tightly. Imagine this stone represents everything you're attached to: your reputation, your tea mastery, your collection, your identity as the greatest tea artist in China." Chen grasped the stone firmly, wrapping his fingers around it with the same intensity he brought to protecting his possessions. "How does your hand feel?" Linji asked after a few minutes. "It's getting cramped and sore," Chen replied, confusion flickering across his face. "Now imagine holding it like this for an hour, a day, a year, your entire lifetime." Linji's voice was gentle but penetrating. "This is what attachment does to your spirit. In Zen Buddhism, we call this grasping mind, the belief that your happiness depends on tightly controlling specific things, people, or outcomes. This is the profound truth that most people never understand. The very act of clinging to what we love often prevents us from fully experiencing it. Right now, imagine your own hands. What are you gripping so tightly that it's causing you pain? What would happen if you loosened your grip just a little? Notice the fear that arises when you even imagine letting go. That's the voice of attachment speaking. But Linji wasn't finished. He continued, "Chen, everything you're clinging to is already changing. This is what the Buddha called anicca, the fundamental impermanence of all things. Your tea-making skills will naturally decline with age. Your precious bowls will eventually break. Your reputation will pass to others. Your body will grow old, and your hands will lose their steadiness. This isn't a tragedy to fear. This is simply the nature of reality. Chen's face went pale. But Master, if I accept that everything will change, won't I stop caring? Won't I become mediocre? How can I maintain excellence if I'm not attached to the outcome? Does this sound familiar? Maybe you think, if I stop worrying about my relationship, won't I stop working on it? If I stop pushing myself so hard at work, won't I become lazy? If I accept my flaws, won't I stop growing? This is one of the most common misunderstandings about Buddhist teachings. Linji smiled knowingly. My friend, there's a profound difference between attachment and engagement. You can pour your heart into your tea ceremony without needing it to validate your worth. You can love your art without demanding it make you immortal. You can care deeply while holding lightly. To demonstrate this teaching, Linji did something that made Chen's heart nearly stop. The master picked up one of Chen's most precious tea bowls, a piece worth more than a house, irreplaceable and priceless. But instead of handling it with fearful reverence, Linji held it casually, appreciating its beauty while remaining completely relaxed. Chen watched in terror, every muscle in his body tensing as he prepared to catch the bowl if it fell. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His entire sense of self seemed to hang in the balance of whether this one object remained intact. Then Linji handed it back, perfectly safe, and said, "When you can hold your most precious possessions with the same ease I just showed, appreciating them fully, but not needing them for your happiness, you will know freedom." The Buddha taught that attachment, not love itself, but desperate clinging, is the root of suffering. Most people misunderstand this teaching completely. They think it means becoming cold, uncaring, or indifferent. Actually, non-attachment allows you to love more deeply because you're not constantly afraid of loss. You're free to experience joy without the shadow of fear because you understand that your essential nature doesn't depend on anything external remaining exactly as it is. Think about this revolutionary possibility. What if you could love your partner without needing them to complete you? What if you could pursue your career passionately without needing it to prove your worth? What if you could care for your children deeply without needing them to fulfill your dreams? What if you could appreciate your youth, your health, your current circumstances without desperately trying to make them permanent? Over the following months, Chen remained at the monastery learning what Zen masters call holding lightly. This practice transformed not just his relationship with his possessions, but his entire approach to life. He discovered something remarkable. When he stopped desperately clinging to his identity as the best tea master, his ceremonies actually became more beautiful. They flowed from genuine love of the art rather than ego-driven fear of losing his position. The tea he served began to carry a quality of presence that transcended technique. People left his ceremonies feeling not just impressed by his skill, but somehow more peaceful in their own lives. He had learned to engage fully while holding lightly, to care deeply without grasping desperately. But Chen's transformation revealed something even more profound about the nature of identity itself. What he discovered next would challenge everything he thought he knew about who he really was beneath all his roles, achievements, and possessions. And this discovery points to the deepest teaching about where our sense of self actually comes from. A traveling monk named Joshu once came to a village where he encountered a young woman sitting by a well, weeping inconsolably. Her clothes were torn, her face was bruised, and she looked like someone who had lost everything. "Sister, what brings you such sorrow?" Joshu asked gently. Through her tears, she told him her story. Her husband had beaten her and thrown her out of their home. Her own family had rejected her, saying she must have done something to deserve such treatment. The villagers whispered behind her back, calling her cursed. She had nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. "I am nothing," she sobbed. "I am worthless. Everyone who was supposed to love me has rejected me. I must be fundamentally flawed, broken beyond repair. How can I live knowing that I'm so unlovable?" Before you judge this woman as weak or dramatic, ask yourself, have you ever felt fundamentally flawed? Have you ever looked at how others treat you and concluded that something must be wrong with who you are at your core? This feeling isn't rare, it's almost universal. Joshu sat beside her in silence for a long time. Then he asked her a strange question. "Tell me, when you look at your reflection in this well water, what do you see?" Confused but curious, she leaned over the water. "I see myself, my face." "Ah," said Joshu. "And if I were to throw a stone into the water, disrupting your reflection, would that change your actual face?" "No, of course not. The reflection might be broken, but my face remains the same." "Exactly," Joshu smiled. "Now listen carefully. All these people who have rejected you, your husband, your family, the villagers, they are like stones thrown into the water. They have disrupted the reflection of how you see yourself, but they have not changed who you truly are." Stop here and really think about this. Who has thrown stones into the water of your self-perception? Maybe it was a parent who called you lazy, a teacher who said you weren't smart enough, a partner who made you feel unworthy, or even strangers on social media. Their opinions disrupted your reflection, but did they change your essential self? Here, Joshu taught her one of the most liberating concepts in Zen Buddhism, the teaching of original nature or Buddha nature. He explained that every person is born with an essential self that is pure, complete, and worthy of love. This true self cannot be damaged by others' actions or opinions. It cannot be improved by success or diminished by failure. "But Master," she protested, "if so many people reject me, surely there must be something wrong with me. How many times have you thought this exact thing? If multiple people have said I'm too sensitive, maybe I am. If I keep getting rejected, maybe I'm not worthy of love. If I struggle with this, maybe I'm broken." Here's what Joshu understood that most people don't. When you seek validation from others, you're essentially asking them to tell you who you are. But other people can only see you through the lens of their own wounds, fears, and limitations. A person who hasn't healed their own capacity for love cannot accurately assess your worthiness of love. Joshu shared the profound Zen understanding of what Buddhism calls external validation dependency. He told her, "Imagine you are the sun. Your light doesn't depend on whether people open their curtains to see it. The sun doesn't stop shining because some houses have closed shutters. Similarly, your worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition of it. But here's the part that might make you uncomfortable. The woman's pain wasn't really about being rejected by others. It was about rejecting herself. When you believe their harsh words about you, you become your own worst enemy. When you accept their judgment as truth, you abandon yourself more completely than they ever could. This is what Zen calls self-abandonment. Think about your inner voice right now. Is it kind to you, or does it sound like your worst critic? Do you treat yourself with the compassion you'd show a good friend, or do you speak to yourself in ways you'd never speak to anyone else? The Buddha taught that seeking validation from others is like being thirsty and trying to drink a mirage. The validation might feel real temporarily, but it can never truly satisfy because it's based on something external and changeable. When you need others to tell you that you're worthy, you give them the power to tell you that you're not. Over the following weeks, Joshu taught the woman a revolutionary practice. Instead of seeking love and acceptance from others, she would learn to give these gifts to herself first. This isn't selfish, it's essential. As the Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you truly forgave yourself for a mistake? When did you last speak to yourself with genuine kindness? When did you last treat yourself with the patience you show others? The woman learned that healing begins when you stop waiting for someone else to tell you that you're worthy and start treating yourself with the kindness you've been hoping to receive from others. She discovered that the love she had been desperately seeking from her husband, her family, and the villagers was already within her. It had just been buried under layers of self-rejection. But what the woman discovered next about the illusion of the separate self would revolutionize her understanding of why we suffer and where true peace actually comes from. High in the mist-covered mountains of feudal Japan, there lived a hermit who had spent 15 years in complete isolation, seeking enlightenment through solitary meditation. His name was Kenji, and he had fled to the mountains after losing his entire family to a plague that swept through his village. The pain of watching his wife and children die had driven him to seek answers in the most extreme form of spiritual practice he could imagine. Kenji had built a small hut deep in the forest, far from any human contact. He grew his own vegetables, collected rainwater, and spent his days in meditation, convinced that if he could just achieve perfect detachment from the world, he would find the peace that had eluded him for so long. He had studied all the Buddhist texts about non-attachment, impermanence, and the illusory nature of suffering. In his mind, he had understood these teachings perfectly. Yet after 15 years of isolation, Kenji was more miserable than ever. His meditation sessions were filled with memories of his dead family, waves of loneliness that threatened to crush him, and a deep, aching sense that something essential was missing from his practice. He had achieved the detachment he sought, but instead of peace, he had found only emptiness. One morning, as autumn mist swirled around his hermitage, Kenji heard an unexpected sound: footsteps approaching through the forest. He felt a stab of annoyance at this intrusion into his solitude. Through the mist emerged a figure he recognized from stories told in the valley below Master Dogen, the renowned Zen teacher who had recently arrived from China. Before you continue with this story, pause and consider your own relationship with isolation and connection. Have you ever believed that you could find happiness by withdrawing from relationships, by protecting yourself from the possibility of being hurt again? Have you ever tried to heal your wounds by building walls around your heart? This impulse is deeply human and understandable, But as Kenji was about to discover, it leads to a profound misunderstanding of what we actually are. Master Dogen approached the hermit's hut with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere else to be. He was carrying a simple traveling bag and walking staff, his robes worn and patched from years of wandering. When he reached the clearing where Kenji sat in meditation posture, he simply bowed and waited. "Master," Kenji said finally, his voice rusty from years of silence, "I have studied your teachings about the emptiness of self and the illusion of individual existence. I have practiced detachment from all worldly concerns. I have spent 15 years in pure solitude, seeking liberation from suffering, yet I am more tormented now than when I began. What am I missing?" Dogen settled himself on a fallen log and gazed out at the morning mist. "Tell me, hermit, in all your years of solitary practice, have you found what you were seeking?" Kenji's face darkened. "I thought I had understood the Buddha's teaching about no self. I believed that if I could just separate myself completely from all attachments, all relationships, all sources of potential pain, I would discover my true nature. Instead, I feel like I'm slowly disappearing, fading away into nothingness." This is where Dogen began to reveal one of the most misunderstood teachings in all of Buddhism, the doctrine of anatman, or no self. Most people, like Kenji, interpret this teaching to mean that the individual self is merely an illusion to be escaped, that enlightenment comes from dissolving into some kind of cosmic void. But this understanding, while partially correct, misses the deeper truth. Think about your own understanding of selfhood for a moment. When you say, "I am hurt," or "I am angry," or "I need love," what exactly are you referring to? Is there some solid, unchanging core that experiences these states? Or is what you call yourself actually a flowing river of thoughts, emotions, sensations, and memories that are constantly changing? Dogen picked up a handful of autumn leaves, red maple, golden ginkgo, brown oak, and held them up to catch the morning light. "Tell me," he said to Kenji, "are these leaves separate from the tree that created them?" "Of course not," Kenji replied, confused by the simple question. "They grew from the tree, were nourished by its roots, shaped by its branches. And is the tree separate from the soil that feeds it, the rain that waters it, the sun that gives it energy?" Dogen continued, "No, master, the tree depends completely on all these elements. Without them, it couldn't exist." "Precisely. Now tell me, where does the tree end and the rest of the world begin?" Dogen asked with a knowing smile. This question stopped Kenji completely. He had never considered it before. The more he thought about it, the more impossible it became to draw a clear line between the tree and its environment. Every element that made up the tree came from somewhere else, was connected to vast networks of interdependence that stretched across the entire planet. This is what the Buddha meant by no self, Dogen explained. Not that you don't exist, but that you don't exist as a separate, isolated entity cut off from the rest of reality. You are like a wave on the ocean. You have your own unique form and character, but you're not separate from the water that creates you. The wave doesn't disappear when it realizes it's part of the ocean. It discovers its true nature. Now apply this understanding to your own experience. When you examine what you call yourself, what do you actually find? Your thoughts come from language you learned from others, ideas you absorbed from books, conversations, and experiences. Your emotions are responses to relationships and circumstances. Your body is made from food that grew in soil, nourished by rain and sunlight. Even your sense of individual identity is largely shaped by how others have seen and responded to you throughout your life. Where exactly is the boundary between you and the rest of existence? The more closely you examine this question, the more mysterious it becomes. This isn't a philosophical puzzle, it's a direct pointing to the nature of reality that can completely transform how you experience yourself and your relationships. Kenji sat in stunned silence as this understanding began to penetrate his consciousness. But Master, if there's no separate self to protect, what have I been doing in this hermitage all these years? You've been trying to save something that was never in danger, Dogen replied gently. You've been attempting to protect an isolated individual who doesn't actually exist. The pain you've been running from isn't caused by your connections to others. It's caused by the illusion that you're separate from them. Here Dogen shared one of the most profound insights in Zen Buddhism, that our suffering comes not from being too connected to life, but from believing we're disconnected from it. When Kenji lost his family, his pain wasn't caused by loving them too much. His pain came from the false belief that their death meant a part of him had been destroyed, that he was now fundamentally alone and incomplete. Consider how this applies to your own experiences of loss and separation. When someone you love dies, moves away, or ends their relationship with you, what exactly has been lost? If you understand your true nature as interconnected consciousness rather than an isolated individual, death and separation take on a completely different meaning. The love that connected you to that person doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the vast web of compassion that connects all life. This teaching might sound abstract or mystical, but it has immediate practical implications for how you deal with pain and relationships. When you truly understand that you're not a separate self struggling against a hostile universe, but rather an expression of the same consciousness that flows through everyone and everything, several profound shifts occur. First, you stop taking things so personally. When someone criticizes or rejects you, you realize they're not attacking some fixed, separate entity called you. They're expressing their own pain and confusion from within the same interconnected web of consciousness that includes you. Their anger is like a storm passing through the sky of awareness. It arises, moves through, and passes away without fundamentally disturbing the sky itself. Second, you discover that helping others is actually helping yourself, not because you'll get something in return, but because the boundaries between self and other are revealed to be conceptual constructions rather than ultimate realities. When you ease someone else's suffering, you're literally easing the suffering of the same consciousness that experiences itself as you. Third, you begin to understand that your individual problems and struggles are not signs of personal failure, but natural movements within the larger dance of existence. Just as waves rise and fall without the ocean being disturbed, your personal difficulties arise and pass away without touching your essential nature. But Master, Kenji protested, if I'm not separate from others, why do I still feel so alone? Why does my grief for my family still hurt so much? Dogen's eyes filled with infinite compassion. Because, dear Hermit, you've been trying to escape from interconnectedness rather than embracing it. You've confused non-attachment with disconnection, wisdom with isolation. True non-attachment doesn't mean cutting yourself off from love and connection. It means loving so completely that you're not afraid of loss, because you understand that what you truly are can never be lost. Think deeply about this distinction in your own life. Have you ever confused being strong with being emotionally unavailable? Have you mistaken wisdom for cynicism or spiritual practice for escapism? The path to freedom doesn't lead away from human connection. It leads through it, to a place where you can love without the desperate need to possess, care without the fear of loss, and grieve without the story that something has gone fundamentally wrong. Over the weeks that followed, Dogen guided Kenji through a practice that would revolutionize his understanding of meditation and spiritual development. Instead of sitting in isolation trying to escape from his humanity, Kenji learned to meditate with the full awareness that his consciousness was not separate from the consciousness of every being in the valley below, every animal in the forest, every element in the natural world around him. When painful memories of his family arose during meditation, instead of pushing them away or clinging to them, Kenji learned to experience them as movements within the vast space of awareness that included all beings who had ever loved and lost. His grief became a doorway to universal compassion rather than a prison of personal suffering. Kenji discovered that his years of isolation had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. He had been trying to find his true self by cutting away everything that seemed not self. But his true nature was not something hidden beneath his relationships and experiences. It was the very capacity for relationship and experience itself. He was not the wave trying to escape from the ocean, but the ocean expressing itself as a wave. The hermit, who had fled human connection to find enlightenment, discovered that enlightenment was actually the recognition of his inherent unity with all life. And this discovery would lead him to understand something even more profound about the practice of presence and the transformative power of simply being fully awake to what is. In the war-torn villages of Vietnam during the 1960s, a young monk named Thich Hanh found himself facing an impossible choice. Around him, his beloved country was being torn apart by violence. Ancient temples were being destroyed, fellow monks were being killed, and millions of innocent people were caught in the crossfire of a conflict they had never asked for. The traditional path for a Buddhist monk was clear. Retreat to the safety of the monastery, focus on personal enlightenment, and let the world burn while pursuing individual salvation. But as Thich Hanh walked through villages filled with wounded children and grieving mothers, he realized that this traditional approach felt like spiritual bypassing, using meditation as an escape from reality rather than a way to engage with it more fully. One morning, as he sat in meditation while bombs exploded in the distance, young Thich Hanh experienced a profound awakening. He understood that true mindfulness wasn't about escaping from the present moment into some peaceful inner sanctuary. It was about becoming so completely present that you could respond to life's challenges with perfect clarity and compassion, even in the midst of chaos. Before we continue with his story, take a moment to examine your own relationship with mindfulness and presence. Do you use meditation and spiritual practice as a way to escape from difficult emotions and challenging circumstances? Or have you discovered how to remain fully awake and responsive even when life becomes overwhelming? This distinction is crucial because it determines whether your practice leads to wisdom or just sophisticated avoidance. As Thich and Hanh sat in meditation that morning, instead of trying to block out the sounds of war, he opened his awareness to include everything: the explosions, the crying children, the fear in his own heart, the compassion arising for all beings caught in this tragedy. He discovered what Zen masters call choiceless awareness, the capacity to be present with whatever is happening without immediately trying to fix it, escape from it, or judge it as wrong. This practice transformed not only his own inner state, but his entire approach to helping others. Instead of offering people abstract philosophical teachings about suffering and impermanence, he began teaching simple, practical methods for finding peace in the midst of their actual circumstances. He taught mothers how to breathe mindfully while caring for wounded children. He showed farmers how to find moments of presence while rebuilding their destroyed homes. One of his most profound innovations was what he called washing dishes to wash dishes. When helping in refugee camps, he noticed that people would wash dishes while their minds were completely elsewhere, worrying about the future, reliving trauma from the past, anywhere but present with the simple act of cleaning a bowl. He taught them that the dishes themselves could become a doorway to peace if they brought their full attention to the warm water, the soap bubbles, the circular motion of washing. Think about your own daily activities right now. When you eat, are you fully present with the taste, texture, and nourishment of your food? Or is your mind scrolling through mental to-do lists, replaying conversations, or planning future scenarios? When you walk, do you feel your feet touching the ground, the air moving in and out of your lungs? Or are you lost in mental movies about past and future? This isn't a small matter. The quality of your presence determines the quality of your entire life experience. You can live for decades without ever truly being here, always waiting for the next moment to bring you the happiness that's actually available right now if you knew how to receive it. Thich and Nhat discovered that mindfulness has three essential components that most people completely misunderstand. The first is stopping, not stopping your activity, but stopping the mental commentary that usually runs over your direct experience like static over a radio signal. The second is actually seeing what's happening in this moment without the filter of your preconceptions and judgments. The third is understanding, recognizing the deeper patterns and connections that become visible only when you're truly present. Let's explore each of these components through a practice you can try right now. First, stop. Without changing your physical position, simply pause the mental chatter that's probably running in the background of your awareness. Notice how your mind immediately wants to start commenting, planning, or analyzing. That's normal. Just gently return your attention to this moment. Second, look. What's actually happening right now in your direct experience? Notice the sensations in your body, perhaps tension in your shoulders, the feeling of air entering and leaving your nostrils, the weight of your body against whatever you're sitting or lying on. Notice sounds around you without labeling them as good or bad. Notice any emotions present without immediately trying to change them. Third, understand. As you become more present, what do you notice about the nature of your experience? Perhaps you observe that thoughts arise and pass away without your control. Maybe you recognize that emotions are like weather patterns. They come and go naturally if you don't interfere. You might discover that there's a sense of spacious awareness that remains constant even as the contents of your experience continuously change. This practice might seem simple, but Thich Nhat Hanh discovered it has the power to transform the most difficult situations. When faced with angry officials who wanted to shut down his relief efforts, instead of reacting defensively or trying to argue, he would bring his full presence to the encounter. This quality of presence often diffused hostility more effectively than any logical argument could. He taught that anger and fear lose much of their power when met with complete presence. When you're fully here, you stop feeding these emotions with mental stories about how things should be different. You can feel the raw energy of anger or fear without being overwhelmed by it. And often this allows the emotion to move through you naturally rather than getting stuck in repetitive cycles. During one particularly intense bombing campaign, Thich Nhat Hanh and his fellow monks were trapped in their monastery for days. Instead of using meditation to escape from their terror, they practiced being completely present with their fear while continuing their daily activities, preparing food, caring for the injured, teaching children. They discovered that presence doesn't eliminate difficult emotions, but it provides a stable ground from which to respond skillfully rather than react unconsciously. This is radically different from how most people approach challenging emotions. Usually, when we feel angry, we either suppress the anger or justify it by building a mental case about why we have the right to be angry. When we feel afraid, we either try to distract ourselves or create elaborate plans to avoid whatever we're afraid of. When we feel sad, we either push the sadness away or dive into stories about why our sadness proves something is wrong with our lives. But what happens when you bring complete presence to anger without the story? What happens when you feel fear without immediately trying to escape from it? What happens when you experience sadness without the mental commentary about what it means? Try this with whatever emotions are present in your experience right now. Thich Nhat Hanh found that presence has a quality of natural wisdom that emerges when you stop interfering with your direct experience. When truly present, you often know exactly what to do without having to figure it out mentally. The right words arise naturally in conversations. Your body knows how to move efficiently. Your heart knows how to respond with appropriate compassion. This isn't mystical or supernatural. It's simply what happens when you stop overriding your natural intelligence with mental noise. Think about moments in your life when you were completely absorbed in an activity you loved. Maybe you were playing music, engaged in sports, creating art, or caring for someone you loved. In those moments, there was no gap between you and your activity, no mental commentary running in the background. Everything flowed naturally. This state of flow isn't reserved for special activities. It's available in every moment if you know how to access it. Thich Nhat Hanh taught people how to find this flow while washing dishes, walking to work, even during difficult conversations. The key is bringing your complete attention to whatever you're doing without trying to be somewhere else. One of his most powerful teachings was about breathing meditation, but not in the way most people practice it. Instead of using the breath to calm down or escape from whatever you're feeling, he taught using the breath as an anchor for complete presence. Each in-breath becomes an opportunity to arrive fully in this moment. Each out-breath becomes a chance to release whatever you're holding onto from the past or future. Try this now. Breathe in with the awareness that you're alive in this moment. Breathe out with the recognition that this moment is all you actually have. Don't try to feel peaceful or centered. Just be completely present with whatever you're experiencing as you breathe. Notice that presence itself has a quality of peace, regardless of what emotions or sensations are arising. Thich and Hanh discovered that this practice of mindful breathing could be done anywhere, anytime, without anyone knowing. Stuck in traffic, waiting in line, lying awake at night, every moment becomes an opportunity to cultivate presence. He taught that if you can remember to take 3 conscious breaths during challenging situations, those 3 breaths can completely transform your response. During peace negotiations, while meeting with hostile government officials, even while being threatened with imprisonment, he would quietly take conscious breaths that allowed him to respond from presence rather than reactivity. This presence was so powerful that it often shifted the entire energy of tense situations. The profound truth he discovered is that presence is not a state you achieve through effort. It's your natural condition when you stop efforting. You don't have to create mindfulness. You only have to stop distracting yourself from the awareness that's already here. You don't have to manufacture peace. You only have to stop generating mental turbulence. This understanding revolutionized not only his own spiritual practice, but his entire approach to helping others heal from trauma and suffering. Instead of trying to fix people's problems or teach them complicated philosophical concepts, he simply helped them discover the peace that was already available in each moment of their actual experience. But as transformative as this practice of presence proved to be, Thich and Hanh would discover something even more profound about the relationship between personal mindfulness and compassionate action in the world. What he learned about turning presence into service would reveal the ultimate purpose of all spiritual practice. In the mountains of Tibet, before the Chinese occupation, there lived a monk named Palden whose story would forever change how we understand the relationship between personal suffering and universal compassion. Palden had entered the monastery as a young boy, not out of spiritual calling, but because his family was too poor to feed him. The monastery represented survival, nothing more. For years, Palden harbored deep resentment toward the world that had forced this choice upon him. He performed his monastic duties mechanically, studied the texts without enthusiasm, and sat in meditation halls filled with bitterness toward the life he felt had been stolen from him. His heart remained closed, protected by layers of anger and self-pity. Everything changed when leprosy began spreading through the remote villages near his monastery. The disease was feared beyond measure in those times. Those afflicted were driven from their communities, abandoned to die alone in caves and wilderness areas. The local abbot announced that the monastery would open its doors to care for these outcasts, and Palden felt his stomach turn with revulsion and terror. When the first group of lepers arrived at the monastery gates, Palden's initial impulse was to flee. Their bodies were ravaged by the disease, missing fingers and toes, faces disfigured beyond recognition. The smell of infected wounds filled the air. everything in Palden's being screamed to run away from this confrontation with human suffering in its rawest form. But here's where Palden's story takes an unexpected turn, one that reveals something profound about how pain can become a doorway to wisdom rather than a prison of bitterness. Instead of running, something made him stay. Perhaps it was the look in one woman's eyes, not self-pity or despair, but a kind of fierce dignity that pierced through his defensive walls. Take a moment to consider your own relationship with suffering, both your own and others. When you encounter someone in deep pain, physical, emotional, or spiritual, what's your instinctual response? Do you try to fix them quickly so you can feel more comfortable? Do you avoid them altogether because their pain triggers your own unhealed wounds? Or do you find yourself somehow drawn to accompany them in their darkness without immediately trying to make it better? As Palden began caring for the lepers, washing their wounds and feeding them, something extraordinary began happening. His own carefully protected pain started to crack open. He realized that his years of resentment and self-pity were just different forms of the same suffering he saw in these diseased bodies. The woman who had lost her fingers to leprosy carried her pain with more grace than he had carried his resentment about missing a childhood he'd never actually had. This recognition marked the beginning of what Tibetan Buddhism calls the practice of Tonglen, literally taking and giving. But Palden didn't learn this practice from books or teachings. He discovered it organically through direct encounter with suffering that was so obvious and immediate it could not be denied, avoided, or spiritualized away. One evening, as he sat beside a dying man whose body was consumed by disease, Palden experienced something that would transform his understanding of what it means to be human. Instead of trying to maintain emotional distance to protect himself, he allowed his heart to completely open to this man's agony. As he breathed in, he consciously invited the man's pain into his own body. As he breathed out, he sent whatever comfort and peace he could find within himself. What happened next defied everything Palden thought he knew about suffering. Instead of being overwhelmed by taking on additional pain, he felt lighter. Instead of being depleted by giving away his comfort, he felt more spacious. The boundaries between his pain and the dying man's pain began to dissolve, and in that dissolution, both forms of suffering were somehow transformed into something else entirely. A compassion so vast, it seemed to include the entire world. This is the profound mystery that most people never discover. When you stop trying to protect yourself from others' pain and instead learn to breathe with it consciously, your own pain stops being a burden and becomes a bridge. Your personal suffering becomes a doorway to understanding the universal nature of human struggle. Your individual wounds become sources of wisdom that can help heal the wounds of others. Think about the deepest pain you've experienced in your life. Perhaps the loss of someone you loved, a betrayal that shattered your trust, a failure that devastated your sense of self-worth, or an illness that forced you to confront your mortality. Now consider this question: how might that pain, fully felt and integrated, become a source of compassion for others experiencing similar struggles? This isn't about finding silver linings or pretending that suffering is good. This is about discovering that pain, when met with conscious awareness rather than resistance, has an alchemical quality that can transform both the one suffering and those who witness that suffering with an open heart. Palden began to understand what the Buddha meant when he taught that suffering, properly understood, is the first noble truth that leads to liberation. Not suffering avoided, not suffering explained away, not suffering fixed, but suffering met with such complete presence that it reveals its deeper teaching about the interconnected nature of all life. As word spread about the monastery's work with lepers, other outcasts began arriving: criminals, madmen, women who had been cast out for various transgressions. Palden found himself drawn to work with the most difficult cases, not out of masochistic self-punishment, but because he had discovered that these encounters with raw human brokenness were systematically dismantling his own protective barriers and revealing depths of compassion he never knew existed. He learned to practice what would later be formalized as Tonglen meditation, but his version was visceral and immediate rather than conceptual. When working with a violent criminal whose rage seemed boundless, Palden would breathe in that rage fully, allowing it to touch his own suppressed anger, and breathe out whatever peace and understanding he could access. When caring for a woman driven mad by grief, he would inhale her madness, let it meet his own confusion and disorientation, and exhale whatever clarity and sanity he could offer. This practice completely revolutionized his understanding of what spiritual development actually means. He had thought it was about purifying himself, becoming more peaceful, accumulating wisdom and virtue. Instead, he discovered it was about becoming more porous, more willing to let life flow through him without constantly filtering it through self-protective strategies. The traditional view of spiritual practice suggests that you work on yourself first, get your own life together, achieve some level of enlightenment, and then perhaps help others from that position of strength and clarity. But Palden's experience revealed a different path. That opening your heart to others' suffering is itself the most direct route to dissolving the illusion of separation that causes your own suffering. This isn't a path for everyone, and it's not without risks. Palden went through periods of what we might now call compassion fatigue, times when he felt completely overwhelmed by the endless stream of human misery flowing through the monastery. He learned that sustainable compassion requires what Tibetan teachers call fierce compassion, the wisdom to know when to engage and when to step back, when to give and when to receive, when to open and when to protect. But what he discovered through this work would influence Tibetan Buddhist practice for generations. He realized that most people's spiritual seeking is actually a sophisticated form of self-improvement, an attempt to create a better, more comfortable version of the ego rather than a genuine dissolution of the barriers between self and other. True compassion, he learned, isn't feeling sorry for people or trying to fix their problems. It's the willingness to be present with suffering, your own and others, without immediately rushing to make it different. It's the recognition that your pain and their pain arise from the same source. The illusion that we are separate beings struggling alone in an indifferent universe. When you truly understand this, something miraculous happens. The energy you were using to defend yourself against life's difficulties becomes available for responding to those difficulties with wisdom and kindness. The walls you built to protect your wounded heart become bridges that connect you to other wounded hearts. Your personal healing and service to others are revealed to be the same activity approached from different angles. This understanding led Palden to one of the most profound realizations in spiritual practice, that there is no meaningful distinction between working on yourself and helping others. Every time you meet your own pain with compassion instead of resistance, you're modeling that possibility for everyone around you. Every time you respond to someone else's suffering with presence instead of avoidance, you're healing something in yourself that you didn't even know was wounded. Near the end of his life, when students would ask Palden about the secret of spiritual development, he would smile and point to whatever suffering was most immediate in their experience. Your depression isn't an obstacle to enlightenment, he would say, it's enlightenment itself if you know how to work with it skillfully. Your anxiety isn't a sign that you're spiritually deficient, it's a doorway to understanding the anxiety that lives in every human heart. The leper colony that had initially terrified him became his greatest teacher. Those disfigured bodies and broken minds showed him that everyone is wounded, everyone is struggling, everyone is doing their best with whatever resources they have available. The only difference between the lepers and the apparently healthy people was that the lepers' suffering was visible on the surface. But Palden's most profound discovery was still to come, the recognition that would complete his understanding of what it means to heal yourself without anyone. What he learned about the ultimate source of both suffering and liberation would reveal the deepest secret of human existence. In a small temple in ancient China, an extraordinary event was unfolding that would challenge everything the Buddhist community thought they knew about enlightenment and spiritual authority. A young student named Huineng, who could neither read nor write, had just been secretly given the transmission of Dharma by the fifth patriarch, bypassing hundreds of learned monks who had spent decades studying sacred texts. The selection had come down to a poetry contest. The head monk, Chen, had written a verse demonstrating his profound understanding of Buddhist philosophy. The body is the Bodhi tree, the mind is like a clear mirror. At all times, we must strive to polish it and must not let the dust collect. The entire monastery was certain he would become the next patriarch. But when Huineng heard this verse, something stirred within him. Despite his illiteracy, he asked someone to write down his response. Bodhi originally has no tree, the mirror also has no stand. Buddha nature is always clean and pure, where is there room for dust? When the fifth patriarch read these words, he immediately recognized that this uneducated outsider had grasped something that eluded even the most scholarly monks. That night, the patriarch secretly called Huineng to his chambers. What he told the young man would become one of the most revolutionary teachings in the history of spirituality. You already possess everything you need for complete awakening. The Buddha nature you seek is not something to be acquired from teachers, texts, or practices. It is what you are. Your only task is to stop looking elsewhere for what is already present. Before we continue with Huineng's story, pause and consider how this teaching challenges your own approach to healing and spiritual development. How often do you seek outside yourself for the peace, wisdom, or wholeness you think you lack? How much energy do you spend looking for the right teacher, the perfect practice, the ideal circumstances that will finally give you access to your own inner resources? The patriarch explained to Huineng what Zen calls original mind. the unconditioned awareness that exists before all learning, before all trauma, before all the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we need to be happy. This original mind is not something you develop through spiritual practice. It's what makes spiritual practice possible. It's not the result of healing, it's the ground from which all healing emerges. But here's where Huineng's story takes a practical turn that speaks directly to anyone struggling with emotional pain or life difficulties. The patriarch warned him that possessing this understanding intellectually was very different from embodying it in daily life. He told Huineng that he would face years of testing, that people would challenge his authority, that he would encounter situations designed to make him doubt his own direct experience of truth. The real practice, the patriarch said, begins when you stop seeking validation for your awakening from anyone else. You must learn to trust your own inner knowing, even when everyone around you says you're wrong, even when your own conditioning tells you to look outside yourself for answers. This is the essence of what Buddhism calls self-reliance, not the arrogant independence of someone who refuses help, but the profound recognition that the deepest solutions to your problems can only come from within your own consciousness. Others can point the way, offer support, share their experience, but no one else can do your inner work for you. Think about the areas of your life where you feel most stuck or in need of healing. Now honestly examine how much of your energy goes into seeking solutions outside yourself. Are you waiting for a therapist to heal your childhood wounds? For a romantic partner to make you feel complete? For a career opportunity to prove your worth? For a spiritual teacher to give you enlightenment? For circumstances to change so you can finally be happy? Huineng spent the next 15 years living as a layman in small villages, working ordinary jobs, facing the same challenges as everyone else, while cultivating what his teacher had shown him. He discovered that self-reliance doesn't mean isolation or refusing support from others. It means maintaining an unshakable connection to your own inner wisdom while engaging fully with life's complexities. When he finally emerged to teach, Huineng's approach was radically different from traditional Buddhist instruction. Instead of offering people elaborate practices to purify their minds, he pointed directly to the purity that was already present. Instead of giving techniques to achieve enlightenment, he demonstrated that enlightenment was their natural state when they stopped trying to achieve it. His most famous teaching story illustrates this perfectly. Two monks were arguing about a flag flapping in the wind. One said the flag was moving, the other insisted the wind was moving. Huineng approached and said, "Neither the flag nor the wind is moving. Your minds are moving." In other words, the disturbance you experience isn't caused by external circumstances. It's created by your mind's commentary about those circumstances. This teaching goes straight to the heart of self-reliance. When you understand that your suffering is created by your own mental activity rather than by what happens to you, you stop being a victim of circumstances and become the master of your own experience. You don't need external conditions to change for you to find peace. You only need to change your relationship to whatever conditions are present. But Huineng also taught something that most self-help approaches miss entirely. True self-reliance includes the wisdom to know when you need help and how to receive it skillfully. He worked closely with other teachers, learned from students, and remained open to guidance from unexpected sources. The difference was that he never gave his power away to anyone else or made his well-being dependent on their approval or support. This is a crucial distinction. Self-reliance doesn't mean never asking for help. It means asking for help from a position of inner strength rather than desperate neediness. It means receiving guidance without losing touch with your own inner compass. It means being grateful for others' support without becoming addicted to it. Near the end of his life, when students would ask Huineng for the secret of his teaching, he would point them back to their own experience. "What did your face look like before your parents were born?" he would ask. This famous koan wasn't a philosophical riddle, it was a direct pointing to the part of you that exists independent of your personal history, your conditioning, your wounds, and your stories about yourself. This original nature, what you were before you learned to be otherwise, is completely intact regardless of what you've experienced. No trauma can damage it. No failure can diminish it. No rejection can separate you from it. It's not something you need to fix, heal, or improve. You only need to remember it, trust it, and allow it to express itself through your unique personality and circumstances. The students who received Huineng's transmission most completely were those who stopped looking for him to give them something they didn't already possess. They realized that his role wasn't to make them enlightened, but to help them recognize the enlightenment that was already present. They learned to use his teachings as a mirror for their own understanding rather than as a crutch for their insecurities. This is the ultimate teaching of self-reliance. You already are what you're seeking to become. You already possess what you think you lack. The healing you're looking for is not something that happens to you, it's something you discover you've always been. And this discovery leads directly to the practical question of how to live from this understanding in your daily life. Now that we've journeyed through these profound teachings together, you might be wondering how to actually apply this ancient wisdom to your modern life. The stories of Linji, Chen, Joshu, Kenji, Thich, Nhat, Hanh, Palden, and Huineng aren't just inspiring tales from the past. They're practical blueprints for transformation that you can begin implementing immediately. Let me share with you 5 daily practices that emerge directly from these teachings. These aren't complicated techniques that require years of training. They're simple methods that can begin shifting your experience from the very first time you try them. The first practice is what I call the 2-arrow check-in. Throughout your day, whenever you notice emotional pain or stress, pause and ask yourself, what's the first arrow here? What actually happened? Then identify the second arrow. What story am I telling myself about what happened? For example, if someone doesn't respond to your text message, the first arrow might be the absence of a response. The second arrow is your story. They don't care about me, I'm not important, something must be wrong. Simply recognizing this distinction begins to dissolve the unnecessary suffering you create through mental commentary. You'll discover that most of your emotional pain comes from second arrow's stories, interpretations, and resistance to what's already happened. The first arrow might sting briefly, but the second arrow can torture you for years. The second practice is the daily attachment inventory. Each evening, reflect on your day and identify 3 things you were gripping tightly, outcomes you desperately wanted, people whose approval you needed, or aspects of your identity you were defending. Then practice the stone exercise mentally. Imagine holding each attachment like a stone in your hand. Feel the tension this creates. Now consciously loosen your grip while still caring about these things. This trains you to engage fully while holding lightly. Remember Chen's discovery: you can be passionate about your work without needing it to validate your worth. You can love people deeply without needing them to complete you. You can care about outcomes without being attached to controlling them. This practice develops the crucial distinction between love and attachment, between caring and clinging. The third practice addresses the mirror of self-worth through what I call compassionate self-talk. Pay attention to your inner dialogue throughout the day. When you make a mistake, notice whether your internal voice sounds like a supportive friend or a harsh critic. When you face challenges, observe whether you encourage yourself or tear yourself down. Each time you catch yourself in self-criticism, pause and ask, how would I speak to a dear friend going through this same situation? Then offer yourself those same words of compassion. This isn't about lowering your standards or accepting mediocrity. It's about recognizing that self-criticism has never actually motivated lasting positive change. Self-compassion, on the other hand, creates the psychological safety necessary for genuine growth. The fourth practice dissolves the illusion of separation through interconnection awareness. Several times throughout your day, pause and notice how completely interdependent your existence is. The food you eat grew from soil, was nourished by rain, and was harvested by people you'll never meet. The air you breathe has been breathed by countless beings before you. The language you think in was developed by thousands of generations of humans. When you truly absorb this reality, several things happen naturally. You stop taking things so personally because you realize that others' actions arise from the same web of interconnected conditions that influences your own behavior. You feel less isolated in your struggles because you understand that your challenges are part of the universal human experience. You become more naturally generous because helping others is revealed as helping yourself. The fifth practice integrates everything through what I call presence anchoring. Choose 3 routine activities in your day, perhaps drinking your morning coffee, walking to your car, or washing your hands. Use these as opportunities to practice complete presence. When drinking coffee, taste it fully without reading your phone or planning your day. When walking, feel your feet touching the ground. When washing hands, attend to the sensation of warm water and soap. This practice trains your mind to be where your body is, which is the foundation of all emotional and spiritual well-being. Most suffering happens when your mind is elsewhere, reliving the past or rehearsing the future. These presence anchors scattered throughout your day create islands of peace that gradually expand to encompass more of your experience. Now, what happens when you feel like you're backsliding, when old patterns of dependency, attachment, and suffering seem to reassert themselves? This is completely normal and expected. Healing isn't a linear process where you steadily improve until you reach some final state of perfection. It's more like a spiral staircase. You revisit the same issues at deeper levels as you grow. When you notice yourself falling back into old patterns, practice what Thich and Hanh called beginning again. Don't judge yourself for not being further along. Don't use your temporary struggles as evidence that these teachings don't work, or that you're somehow spiritually deficient. Simply notice what's happening with compassion and gently redirect your attention to what you've learned. Remember that everyone who achieved genuine freedom went through periods of doubt, confusion, and apparent regression. These aren't signs of failure, they're necessary parts of the integration process. Each time you catch yourself in an old pattern and consciously choose a more skillful response, you're strengthening new neural pathways and weakening old conditioning. The goal isn't to become someone who never experiences difficult emotions or challenging circumstances. The goal is to develop an unshakable inner foundation that remains stable regardless of what life brings. You're cultivating the capacity to remain centered in the midst of chaos, compassionate in the face of cruelty, and peaceful despite external turbulence. These practices work because they're based on the fundamental structure of human consciousness rather than cultural beliefs or religious dogma. They've been tested by millions of people across thousands of years in every conceivable circumstance. They work for busy parents and contemplative monks, for trauma survivors and people who have lived relatively easy lives, for those dealing with poverty and those managing abundance. Your consistent practice of these 5 approaches will gradually but inevitably transform your relationship to yourself and your circumstances. You'll discover the unshakable peace that comes from no longer needing life to be different than it is. You'll find the profound freedom that emerges when you stop waiting for others to heal, validate, or complete you. You came here carrying something heavy, believing it belonged to you. Now you know the truth, that weight was never yours to bear. The peace you've been seeking was never hidden from you. The wholeness you've been chasing was never missing. The love you've been desperately trying to earn was always flowing through you. You are not broken. You never were. You are not alone. You never have been. The monastery bells that rang for Linji, the tea ceremony that awakened Chen, the well water that reflected truth for Joshu's student, they all ring and flow and reflect for you right now in this moment. Your healing journey ends where it began, with you in this breath, in this heartbeat, complete exactly as you are. The echoes of Dharma are calling. Will you finally come home to yourself?